30 Years a Watchtower Slave, Chapter 17, entitled The Theocracy of 1938. The first subheading is The Judge's Dreams. Back in the 6th chapter, the author had talked about Judge Rutherford's dream while he was in prison in Atlanta, Georgia, and about his determination to get back at Christendom for putting them in prison. Well, the Theocracy of 1938 was the culmination of that dream. Remember, in 1938 is when they got rid of electing elders and getting rid of all autonomy from the congregations. And so now elders would be appointed from the society. So the local congregations held no more power. That all shifted to the society. So he was basically using the same blueprint as the Israelites in the Bible from 1919 to 1938. The society started out by using that same borrowing technique that the Israelites did when they left Egypt, how they stripped the land, the Egyptians, of their riches. He did the same thing basically from starting in 1922 with the selling of books to gain money and wealth, and the giving of the law to the Israelites was basically the same thing to the theocracy. They were also given a law that they were to obey. This was done from 1919 to 1931, during which the overwhelming old school Bible students left, those who were considered part of the Mordecai-Naomi class. They didn't really take too well to these new changes in laws and orders, and so they left. This, of course, made room for the new school Bible students, those of the Ruth Esther class. So in the same manner that the Exodus generation died off in the desert, those of the old school Naomi class died off as well. And that left a new generation, just like Joshua had his followers after Moses and those died off in the desert. He had a new generation of Jehovah's Witnesses to enter this promised land of theocracy. And as the Israelites were about to enter the promised land, they crossed the Jordan River and they left 12 big stones to commemorate that event. The Watchtower had piles of books rather than piles of these big stones that gave visual evidence that Jehovah was with them and to lead them into that land of praise or promised land, into the Watchtower Kingdom service. And the reward for crossing this river, as the reward was for the Israelites was to enter the promised land, that reward was in 1931 and taking on their new name, Jehovah's Witnesses. The next subheading is entitled The Third Tier. So the first tier had come under the dictatorship of C.T. Russell, and that was from 1879 to 1916. The second tier of the society was under the dictatorship of J.F. Rutherford, and this was from 1919 to 1942. But even before his death, the third tier was now in the making. Toward the end of Judge Rutherford's death, they were creating a committee of 7 to take over, to be selected out from the ranks of the charter members of those who now formed the society. These charter members were to be appointed by the society, and these in turn would furnish the leaders for the society. From among these charter members were selected the board of directors, and from the board of directors were selected the president, the vice president, the secretary, and treasurer, who in turn filled by appointment their own vacancies amidst these charter members. And so that's how this third layer had started. It was the good old boys club. So with the establishment of the theocracy, the building program was now at hand. It was time to expand the theocracy. The seven-step program created a vicious circle, causing all to think alike and work alike. It cut off witnesses from normalcy and from the personal religion of Jesus. It meant the end of liberty for them, and it condemned them into slavery of the New World Society. The author mentions that he was assigned as co-chairman of the Cleveland outlet of the London Worldwide Assembly. The highlights of this convention were 2 talks by the judge on Face the Facts and Fill the Earth. So let's get into those 2 talks. Face the Facts is the next subheading. Fascism and freedom was a topic of keen interest to all during these years. Fascism was rampant in Europe and war loomed on the horizon. The judge declared that theocracy was in favor of freedom and against regimentation. But the author knew, as well as probably many of Jehovah's Witnesses, that freedom would not be tolerated within the ranks of Jehovah's Witnesses. So this talk, Face the Facts, was the first of a series of declarations which culminated in 1941 in the booklet entitled Neutrality. This series of declarations helped Jehovah's Witnesses to stay out of military services in this country and earned them only 5-year jail sentences in countries where they failed. The next talk is Fill the Earth. So while the judge declared opposition to totalitarianism and neutrality to the outside world, he sounded the horn for the starting of a relentless campaign to make all Jehovah's Witnesses absolutely totalitarian. With the advent of the theocracy of 38 came the primary task of training all those who come under its spell. And this training is very well a brainwashing program. So thousands of young people were preferred in this work. Why? Because they didn't have any dependents or anything to encumber them or to slow them down. And so they were the prime candidates for this training. So for that reason, the society proclaimed the doctrine, Fill the Earth. And of course, in this talk, the judge alluded to the end of the world. It's always close to the Jehovah's Witnesses. So it was easy for the judge to impress these young people not to marry before Armageddon, since it was so close, even back then in those times, the 1930s. It would be so much better for them to wait until the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ to raise their families. Now was the time for them to remain single and to devote their prime years to the theocracy. But later in 1940, this was followed up by the book entitled Children, with the stirring and touching story of John and Eunice. John and Eunice, they were 2 young single Jehovah's Witnesses who were deeply in love with each other. But both being theocratic minded, they decided to wait until after Armageddon before getting married. They decided this because the end of the world was at hand. What a touching love story. This was in 1940. So there's no way that they would ever grow up and have children and get an education back there in 1940 because it was such a small amount of time left on this side of Armageddon. So they merely used this doctrine, fill the earth, as a ruse, and we can see this from what happened later. The highest of all the officials, the hardcore of the theocratic bachelors, Nathan H. Knorr, later decided not to wait until after Armageddon to get married, but rather he wanted some action right now. So the charming story of John and Eunice in the book Children, even though it was so beautifully written, was soon forgotten, and that book now cannot be procured anywhere from Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses probably have no idea about this book. It has become one of their many organizational skeletons rattling inside their dark and secret closet. So, like the prediction of the end of the world in 1924, 1925, 1914, and then the prediction of Armageddon after the war, fill the earth had served its purpose to steam up the witnesses, but was now discarded. This seems to be a routine procedure with the Watchtower Society. This is going to end this chapter. Please stay tuned for the next. Thank you for taking time to watch and listen to this presentation. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for the next chapter.